What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of Reason to Doubt, your source for all things skeptical. I'm Jordan, and with me, as always, is Jared. How's it going, Jared?
It is going really well. I'm feeling a little tired today. I don't know if you've heard of any sleep aids or anything that might help with that.
Well, what a random thing that was not at all planned, because I have a sleep aid right here for you. It's called Highlands Calms Forte.
Ooh, that sounds fancy.
It is a homeopathic remedy, which means it's all natural and safe, and it's supposed to make you drowsy. That's the idea. And I also am feeling a little drowsy. We thought we'd talk about homeopathic medicine today, so I went out to the store and I bought this, and I'm feeling very wired today. So this bottle that I have in my hand has 50 tablets, so I'm just going to take all 50. That should probably take care of it, right?
Wait. You're taking 50 tablets?
Yeah, I mean, you don't want that as a. So I have not. I just opened this bottle right in front of Jared, and I was vastly underestimating just how many pills are in my hand right now. So yes, I'm going to take all 50 just to prove a point. And while I'm choking down all these pills, Jared's going to talk about the fallacy of the day.
So the fallacy of the day is the anecdotal fallacy. So watching Jordan take down all these pills.
That's a lot of pills.
So, wow. Okay, I got distracted here. So this is using isolated specific anecdotes as evidence for a much broader claim. So, for example, you could say, there's no way smoking is bad for you. My grandfather smoked every day and he lived until he was 90. You may have also heard somebody say, there's no way, eating bacon is bad for you. My grandfather ate bacon every day and he never had a heart attack.
Grandfather had a good life, smoking every day, eating bacon all the time.
Exactly. So curiously here, the plural of anecdote is not data, right?
Yeah, it's kind of human nature that we tend to latch on to like emotional stories. We're storytelling beings, right?
Yeah.
And so everybody has the story from their mother's cousin's hairdresser that tried this thing and it worked out. And that is persuasive to them. Way more persuasive than some random person in a lab coat they've never met, in some medical journal. An anecdote can be plagued with all kinds of problems because there's no controls for all the various things that be going wrong. The story could be changed. But imagine you get the flu and you're feeling really sick and you're desperate and you Google it up and you find someone say that if you rub strawberry jam all over your body or on your chest, like Vicks Vapor Rub or something, that'll cure it. And so you do it and the next day, boom, you're fine. Maybe the strawberry jam did it, or maybe you just got better,
Yeah. So it's also important. I mean, sometimes you may have heard the phrase correlation is not causation, which is not exactly the anecdotal fallacy, but I think it plays into that here. And it's easy. It's important to keep that in your mind, just because somebody has a good anecdote for something doesn't mean it's the reason why. Doesn't mean it's not,
right.
But it doesn't mean it's the reason why.
So that fallacy is going to play into what we're talking about today. Like we said, we're going to talk about homeopathy, whatever. Homeopathy. So if you haven't heard it, it's actually really hard to find. So what homeopathic remedies are, they're like an alternative medicine. By the way, what do they call alternative medicine that works?
We call it medicine.
They call it medicine. That's right. But it is an alternative remedy. And if you go into the pharmacy, so when I went to go buy this stuff, I was in there to get medicine for my wife, Kim. She has a sore throat. So I was going to get her some stuff. And I remembered we were doing this podcast. So I thought it'd be fun to do this test, which James Randi and others have done. And it was actually really hard for me to find this, not because they were hiding it, not it was out of the way. It wasn't. It was right in the middle of all of the other traditional medications, right? And there is a tiny, tiny thing right in the corner. It says homeopathic. You can barely see it. I only found it because I had heard the name Calms Forte and knew what I was looking for. But if I didn't know that, I would have no idea that this was a homeopathic remedy.
Yeah, so you could literally just be an average Joe or Jane in the CVS or pharmacy, oh, I need a sleep aid because I'm having trouble sleeping, and you grab that one. Got a cool name.
Right, exactly. And it looks nice, and it looks what the kind of packaging you get on every other kind of thing in CVS. So it'd be very easy to get one of these without realizing what you're getting. And as we're going to talk about today, what you're actually getting is nothing or very close to nothing, which is why I just ate 50 pills of nothing.
Is there an FDA warning or packaging on that thing at all?
No, so I'm looking at it, and there's nothing about the FDA. If you look on the back, it does look very official, like every other kind of drug you've ever seen. It has directions and active ingredients, but there's so here's at the bottom: claims based on traditional homeopathic practice, not accepted medical evidence, not FDA evaluated. But it's at the bottom. They're not exactly hiding it, but they're not exactly highlighting it either. And it includes such things as Avena sativa 4x HPUS. And Calcarea phosphorica 3x HPUS. Now, what does that mean?
What the hell is that?
Well, we're going to get into that in a minute. But first, let's talk about where homeopathy came from. Okay, where this started. It all started, it's about 200 years old. So it got its start back in 1814. A gentleman by the name of Samuel Hahnemann, who was a medical doctor. He got his medical degree in 1779, and he took a crack at being a normal doctor, but it wasn't working very well. He was kind of struggling. And then he stumbled on a principle that he called like cures like. So what happened was he was chewing on this bark, this cinchona bark. That bark contains quinine, which is an actual compound used to treat malaria.
Okay.
Malaria caused by a particular parasite, Plasmodium falciparum. And so he chewed the bark, and it helped with the malaria because the quinine in it actually does help. But he believed that it helped because the bark caused similar symptoms to the malaria, but in much smaller amounts. Right.
Okay. So kind of like the idea, like you fight fire with fire.
Right. Or he pointed to vaccines, like you use cowpox to help prevent smallpox,
right.
Same kind of thing. Right. And so he thought that if you wanted to treat an illness, say you wanted to treat like a stomach bug, you would give the patient a medicine that when given to a healthy person would make them feel nauseous or throw up or whatever. But you want to give it to them. So that's the first pillar, like cures like. Then the second pillar was you want to give it that medication, quote unquote, or that thing to them in the smallest amount possible.
Okay.
And
because you don't want too much, right? Because otherwise you would hurt them.
So you would think that would be why, right? That's why I would think why. I mean, you don't want to overdose them, but that's actually not. I don't know. Now, the first part, the like cures like, I can kind of see why you'd go there, and maybe in 200 years ago it wasn't completely unreasonable to at least explore. But then he made a huge leap. I don't know exactly how he made this leap. Nobody said in any of the sources I found, but then he went so the idea that dilution increases potency, and he thought that if you diluted the water, but you diluted it while shaking it, that the water would retain its therapeutic power through this process called potentization, which is mixing it in while shaking. It would persist as a dematerialized spiritual force.
Wait, you lost me there.
So here's how the process works. And this is going to get into the cons forte that I have. So the first ingredient was Avena sativa 4x HPUS, right? And so 4x means it's decimally diluted 4 times. So you take your original substance, you dilute it 1 part of the original substance to 9 parts of your dilution, usually water or
1
whatever.
to 9 ratio.
Yeah. And then you do that 4 more times. So for 2x, you take your 1x, which is already diluted, you do 1 part of that to another 9 parts of water.
So now you're 1 in 99.
And then for 3x, you do that again. So by the time, for instance, this Avena sativa, which is just oatmeal, the 4x that I just ingested, it's been diluted to the point where after the 50 pills I just ate, I have 0.0005 of the original concentration
of oatmeal.
Right. And the same goes for all the rest. Calcarea, phosphorica, 3x, chamomile, 4x. It goes on. They're all very fancy sounding names, but these are all 3x or 4x diluted. So what Hahnemann recommended was a 60C dilution. So these are all 4x, right? That's a decimal.
So C, I'm thinking, is 100.
Yes, exactly. So C is the, what do they call it? Centesimal. So you have decimal and centesimal. It's the same process, except instead of going 1 to 9, so you're going like to a 10% dilution, it's 1 to 100. So it's 10 times as diluted.
60 times?
And that, 60 times was the one he recommended. Now, they claim that the more dilute it gets, the more potent it gets, right? If after 4C dilutions, you reach the lab definition for pure water. Pure water is considered pure by a lab when it's like pure to the 10 parts in a billion.
Yeah, we're talking like Flint standards of water, right? Like
we're talking like this is like if you need to use water in an experiment and it needs to be pure, this is the purity you need. And we're only at 4C. Once you get to 13C, if you used water, it'd be statistically unlikely there would be any original molecules left.
Right. So they get like, I mean, I don't know. I'm not a science like lab person here, but like at some point, like you're beyond like even like a single atom, right? Like,
yeah. So you're below the molar limit. So there's only so many atoms in a mole of things, right? When you have, if you had like 1 mole per liter, if you diluted that so much, you would get to the point where it'd be very unlikely there'd be any atoms of your original substance left because they'd just be spread out so much, right?
The chances of you actually making that into the final solution is pretty
very
slim.
low. Yeah. Right. So for instance, at the 60 C dilution, you'd have to deliver an average of 2 billion doses to 6 billion people every second for 4 billion years before you got any original substance to anybody.
But the substance isn't what's important here, right? Because Hahnemann thought that it increased potency. So even though the original substance wasn't there, his idea was that the water actually retained that information. Like it learned and it like kept that in its properties, right?
Through the shaking, which they call potentization, but let's not get twisted. They're shaking it. So, or banging it on their hand is another accepted method. So they believed that through the shaking, even though there wasn't any of the original stuff left, it kind of taught the water. Water has memory is a phrase you hear from them. He called it a dematerialized spiritual force. The homeopaths of today have kind of moved away from that more woo sounding to water has memory, I guess somewhat less woo sounding thing. Mm-hmm. But the idea is, something about this shaking imparts a property on the water.
I mean, just on face value, that seems ridiculous. Also, it flies in the face of like just common like sense, right?
Right. Like the way that your body interacts with chemicals that you ingest, whether it's medicine or anything else, is it like it takes a molecule and breaks it down. Like that's how it absorbs it into itself, the actual thing, there's no difference between a water molecule is a water molecule is a water molecule. They're all water,
Well, so I did a little research on this Samuel Hahnemann guy. And what I found, it was a little interesting, was in his early practice, what he was doing was he wasn't only prescribing these homeopathic solutions, he was also prescribing like a very limited, restricted lifestyle and diet. So he was cutting out dairy, meat, he was cutting out sugars, he was prescribed no sedentary lifestyle. So like no sitting around. He cut out masturbation. You couldn't read pornographic literature. He basically made it so like what people were eating was a very healthy diet and they had a very active lifestyle and they were, the masturbation is up to debate, but a very mentally stable kind of lifestyle where they were engaging with other human beings and they were being social and stuff. So it's no surprise that the people he were treating actually may have improved in whatever their ailments were.
Yeah, and that's a good point. So we talked about the first two pillars, like cures like and dilution increases potency. That kind of ties into the third pillar, which is whole body treatment. They treat the whole patient.
Yeah.
Right. And so when they give a treatment, they meet with you for several hours and talk about like your entire lifestyle. And in addition to giving you here's a homeopathic remedy, they'll also talk about like your sleep schedule and exercising and all that other stuff. And all of that is good, right? But that muddies the water, you know, like you said, if you change your diet and you increase exercise and you're going outside more and all that, and also you chew this tea leaf, well, maybe it's the other stuff, you know?
Yeah.
It's funny. So the way you test that, right? There's a way we would test that. We would test it with a clinical trial.
Like a double-blind study or something.
Right, which we've talked about on this podcast before. And it's ironic because homeopathy, which is complete nonsense, and we'll get into the data in a minute, but it ironically has contributed to humanity in the sense that it actually helped invent double-blind randomized trials.
Which is it's very ironic, isn't it?
Yeah. So here's how it went down. So Hahnemann is doing his thing, and it's gotten more popular. It's not just Hahnemann now. It's like sweeping through Europe. And in 1835 in Nuremberg, the upper crust of Bavaria was really into homeopathy, and this pissed off Friedrich Wilhelm von Hoven, who was a doctor. Yeah. Von Hoven was a doctor in Bavaria, and he was very miffed at this. And he published just a crushing critique of homeopathy. He said it lacked all scientific foundation. It was terrible, just ripped it apart. In response, Johann Jakob Reuter, who was a homeopathic physician in Nuremberg, he challenged Friedrich to try a C30 dilution. So that's, again, the salt had been diluted 1 to 130 times. And he challenged him to see its effects. So double-blind clinical trials did not exist before here, but Friedrich and various physicians in Nuremberg invented them out of spite just to prove a point. So what they did is they went to like a pub and they numbered the vials. They published in advance what they were going to do. Here's how we're going to run this trial. Then they numbered vials, split them randomly into two lots. One lot was filled with distilled snow water. The other was prepared according to the instructions of Reuter, the homeopathic physician. A single grain of salt was added to 100 drops of stone water. Then that solution was distilled 29 times at a ratio of 1 to 100, which means that you have that 1 grain of salt. Then you take that, add it 1 part to 100 of water, then take that and add 1 part to 100, then that and 1 part, over and over 29 times. Okay. The pharmacists they recruited to do this had taken 2 days to prepare for this. They cleaned themselves, they cleaned all their equipment, and they used scales that had never before been used on anything. Brand new scales. So there's no hope of contamination. Then, on the day of, they handed these prepared vials to a commission that had no part in preparing. They didn't know what was in them, or they didn't know which was which, right? And then that commission handed them to the participants. And then they got all of the feedback, and what they found was that they wanted people to tell them if they experienced anything unusual. And 5 came back and said they had, and they got homeopathy, and 3 who had just received water did. So about the same. And this, I mean, if you think about it, they just like came out of the blue with this. If you look at how this would compare to a modern trial, the protocol was designed and announced in advance. There was a control group that received a placebo. There was and another group that got the medication being tested. The assignment to the groups was completely random. The test was double-blind. Neither the people taking the medicine or the people distributing the medicine knew which was which. The results of both were compiled, and they reported any irregularities. Like, this was a well-designed study. Like, they nailed it on their first go.
That's pretty remarkable, actually. I mean, you have a randomized, controlled, double-blind study.
And they did it all in a bar.
Yeah. I mean, all studies should be done in bars, I'm just going to say.
Right. I mean, well, the first one was. So, yeah. So that started a grand tradition of studies on homeopathy that continues all the way to today. And so it, like you said, the premise is just ridiculous. The idea that water, if you shake it, it has this unbound spiritual energy. What does that even mean? You know, and it's like, okay, so the water can remember this bit of rent onion. I shook it up, but it doesn't remember all the dinosaur poop that was in it. Like,
yeah,
you know,
well, I mean, if you really think about it too, water, I mean, the same water molecules are just floating around the earth. Like, it's not like they, go away, right? So like, think about how much shit is in our water molecules. Like, from the ocean, it gets evaporated, and then it comes down to rain, and then it evaporates, and like, how much potency would be in the water in the world today? Like,
right. And granted, not all of that water was shooken up while it was submerged with pee, right?
But maybe,
but I mean, sometimes it's going to be agitated, right? Like, how shook is shook, you know? Right. But anyways, ridiculousness aside, it has been studied. And so you can look for tons of different studies, but I've got two that I'm going to share today. The first one I'm going to share is actually from a friendly source. So the Journal, in air quotes, of Alternative and Complementary Medicine, which is a journal specifically to study alternative medicine like homeopathy. So these are as friendly a source as you could get while still having even a vestige of peer review.
Real quick, before we move on, like, we could have stopped and said, this claim is ridiculous. We don't need to look into this. But because we're good skeptics and someone made a claim, we're going to look into it.
I mean, a lot of things might have sounded ridiculous before you had evidence.
Yeah.
The idea that, like, if a sphere is flying through space really fast, it becomes flat like a pancake. Well, that kind of seems kind of silly, but it's true. Yeah. So anyway, this journal published a paper in 2006, Homeopathic Combination Remedy in the Treatment of Acute Childhood Diarrhea in Honduras by Jacobs et al. And it was kind of a smaller study. They treated 292 kids for diarrhea. They, like all double blinds, just like our one in Bavaria, they gave some patients a placebo. They gave some homeopathic treatments, and then they compared over a 7-day period how often they recovered, how good their poops were, etc. And turns out there was basically no difference. The placebo worked just as well as the homeopathic remedy. Now, I think we should take a moment here to talk about placebos, because if you didn't have that piece, what you would get from this study is that, say you had one group who was given nothing and used them as a control, and then you gave another group this homeopathic remedy, you would probably find that the group who had been given the remedy was a little bit better off.
Right? Because placebo does have an effect. Like, the mind has the ability to manifest things, mind-body relationship, all that stuff. So placebos, for those who may not be aware, what a placebo is, it's a fake cure. It's a cure that has nothing in it. Usually it's like a sugar pill, or if it's like an injection, it's just saline, which is just water with salt in it. So it has nothing in it. But when given to the person who doesn't know, they think that they might be getting a treatment. Just the fact that they are getting a treatment, regardless of what it is, tends to improve outcomes. Not a lot, but a measurable amount. And that's the placebo effect. Just the mere fact that you are doing something, even if that something is completely ineffective, helps. Which is completely weird in and of itself, but it's a thing. It is a very weird effect, but it is a extremely well-established effect, to the point where if you're doing a study, they will almost always compare it either to a placebo, which is a placebo controlled study, or they'll test it against an established medicine with a good track record that they know exactly what it should be. Right. Well, the other thing to point out too is like if you're doing a controlled study and you tell somebody, hey, I'm not giving you X, then that person knows they didn't get X. Right. And then you tell somebody, I am giving you X, and now they know they're getting X. You still have humans to interact with to report on their feelings and stuff. So like if somebody knows they got a substance, they may report back, oh, I'm supposed to feel something, or I'm supposed to have a reaction here. There's implications to where they may say, I don't feel anything, but I'm supposed to, so let me report that I do.
Or even if like I took this pill, I feel like I took this pill in order to make me sleepy, so I'm expecting to feel sleepy.
Wait, are you feeling sleepy though?
No, not in the slightest. But there is that effect. Or there's some people, you'll give them a drink and there's no alcohol in it, but they'll start acting a little tipsy because, whatever.
Yeah, we did that when I was on a deployment one time. We got a bunch of near beer. So near beer is beer that has like 0.something% alcohol, but we gave it to some new guys and we told them it was like real beer and they started acting all funky. It's like it's placebo.
Humans are weird. Is the bottom line. So that's the study there. There was no effect beyond the placebo, which you'd get from just like a sugar pill. But that was a very small sample size. So let's go bigger. In fact, let's go about as big as I've ever seen. In 2015, the NHMRC, which is the National Health and Medical Research Council, which is ran by the Australian government, they did a gargantuan meta-analysis. So what a meta-analysis is an analysis of analysis. It's a study of studies. So they went out, and this was actually a meta-analysis. So they looked at data from 1997 to 2013. They analyzed 176 systemic reviews.
Which are basically meta-analysis, right?
It's a kind of meta-analysis. So all told, that second tier of analysis, if you took all the studies that was involved in some way or another with this paper, they looked at 1,800 peer-reviewed papers on this topic. Now, a lot of them had been tossed out. So they looked at all 1,800, and when you're doing a meta-analysis, you always have some criteria by which you filter. So they examined the studies to see how well designed they were. Were they double-blind? Did they have a placebo or a control group? Was the methodology sound? All these sort of things. Was there a large sample size? They do all these things to make sure that the studies are well-designed. And then they'll analyze all of the well-designed studies, the studies that made it through their filtration efforts, and then see what comes out. And because you're leveraging this huge sample size, this huge data group, you can get trends that you might miss with just one or two studies. So what do they get? Looking at, 16 years worth of data and over almost 2,000 papers, they said, quote, based on all the evidence considered, there were no health conditions for which there was reliable evidence that homeopathy was effective. No good quality, well-designed studies with enough participants for meaningful result reported either that homeopathy caused greater health improvements than placebo or caused health improvements equal to those of another treatment.
That is a nail in a coffin if I have ever seen one from peer-reviewed research.
Just straight up, absolutely no effect.
It's not even better than placebo. It's the same.
But like you mentioned earlier, we did a podcast on Reiki, and at least Reiki sometimes in some studies outdid the placebo.
Right.
It wasn't by a lot. There's reasons to think that that's probably an artifact, but at least it had something. That this is just had nothing.
Yeah, this is a nombo from the start.
Right. And then, so this is very interesting, though. So they did that analysis, right? And they concluded nothing, but they wanted to make sure that they weren't being biased or they weren't missing anything, or, whenever you talk about this, the other side's, well, it's always big pharma and they don't want to talk about it, blah, blah, blah. So what they did was they did that first phase, and then they put out a call to the public and to homeopathic interest groups, people whose entire existence is to promote homeopathy. And they said, here's our analysis. Give us your best evidence. What is the best thing, the best studies that we didn't include? Give us your best evidence. and they got 42 more studies from that group, and it didn't change the outcome at all. They said the studies were either flawed and not well designed, so they weren't like double blind, they weren't large sample size, etc., or they didn't show them to be effective.
We harp on meta-analysis a lot on this podcast because of their effectiveness in showing large trends amongst studies and stuff. I've never seen a meta-analysis so large with such a definitive claim, right? Most times they'll couch their bets a little bit and kind of, that language they use was specifically.
Yeah. If you read a lot of peer-reviewed papers, usually they tend to be very conservative in the sense that they don't make sweeping claims. Part of the mark of a good paper is that they're only talking as far as the evidence in the paper will talk about. In fact, there was a paper that I read on homeopathy that got critiqued by other scientists, not because their conclusions they thought were wrong, but because it included like an editorial section where they talked about how terrible homeopathy was. And other scientists were like, whoa, you can't do that. Like, you need to only talk about what your evidence talks about. And even though I agree with everything you said, your evidence doesn't say that.
Right.
And so to have a paper this big to just say, we looked at all the evidence and there is no effect is huge.
I'd like to go back to your pills that you took 50 plus pills earlier.
No, it was exactly 50.
Okay, 50.
Get our dosage right.
Your dosage was 50. So if we think about homeopathy for a second and why someone might think that that's effective, the way that homeopathy works is that you sit down with the homeopath and they will talk with you, have a nice consultation with you, and they're going to do several things. One, they're going to look at your lifestyle. They're going to look at your diet. They're going to look at all these extra things. So if Jordan said, I'm having trouble sleeping, not only are they going to give him this magic pill, they're also going to say, hey, maybe you should stop looking at screens an hour before bedtime. Hey, maybe you should start exercising more. Hey, maybe you should start, eating these foods or not eating these foods. And guess what? Your sleep's going to improve. So as the person who's taking that pill, they're going to go, oh my gosh, this pill is working. When in fact, it might just be lifestyle change.
So, or if you don't go through the process of like talking to the homeopath, if you just like go to like what I did, go to CVS.
Right.
It was funny. So I was looking up this medication before the podcast and I saw that they sold it on Amazon. I was looking through the reviews and people were asking like, how effective is it? How long will it take? And there were so many people who were saying, oh, it's super effective. I take 2 or 3 of these with 1 Ambien and I go right out. And I'm like, you don't say. So many people are talking about, oh, I take like a sleeping pill and then 2 of these and it works every time.
Oh my gosh.
Like, come on.
I drink a shot of water with my whiskey and I get drunk.
Yes, yeah, like I can't even think of like a good comparison. It's just so ridiculous.
Oh man.
Maybe if you just took the sleeping pill, you'd also have the same effect.
Yeah. Maybe we could design a study to say, all right, let's give 100 people Ambien and 100 people placebo and 100 people Ambien plus.
Yeah, if only
whatever it's called, I don't know.
If only we had a way to study this that they invented in Nuremberg for this very specific, for this purpose, for this thing.
Well, if nothing else from this podcast, I am super excited about the fact that I learned where double-blind studies originated.
Yeah, it's really cool that this thing is exactly like people are doing today. Well, it's cool and also kind of depressing that the thing that this method was invented to debunk is still being used today. And it's not small. So this is a multi-billion-dollar industry.
Yeah. So when you mentioned big pharma earlier, the research that I had done had revealed that this is its own big pharma in and of itself. I mean, like you said, multi-billion dollars. I don't know if you have the exact numbers of the estimated amount of money spent on homeopathy in a year, but
so it's hard to get an exact estimate because it's not FDA approved, it's not regulated. There's no agency really governing these sort of remedies, but the estimates I've seen have been somewhere in the neighborhood of $6 billion in the U.S. alone.
That's not chump change.
And that's just the US, and it's much bigger in Europe and other places.
Yeah. From what I could see, the prevalence of homeopathy is much greater in the United Kingdom and then, Western Europe. So,
and this brings us to why we're talking about this. So, because, I mean, if somebody takes...
It's funny, right?
Yeah. I mean, well, first, it's nonsense, and we debunk nonsense for fun. Yeah. But aside from that, if somebody just wants to take a couple of sugar pills, which are really all these, well, I guess it's not technically sugar. It's lactose, magnesium, stearate, microcrystalline cellulose, and starch, corn and tapioca. Who cares? It's not that big a deal. And as long as that's all that ever was, that's all that would be fine. But there exists the very real risk in the fact that people will forego actual effective treatments in favor of homeopathic treatments. So they have an actual disease. So for instance, one of the papers I saw was talking about cancer treatments. Another meta-analysis, the efficacy of homeopathic therapy in cancer treatment, which was published in 2006 by Milazzo et al. The very fact they are talking about cancer treatment and homeopathy in the same sentence is frustrating, to say the least.
Because that means there was enough people who believe that homeopathy could help them with their cancer that they chose to go that route.
Right. There was enough people that this was worthy of the money it took to fund a study to see if it was effective. So there are people who are foregoing actual cancer treatments in favor of what are effectively sugar pills. And that's not okay.
Yeah.
So it's more than just the homeopaths themselves. It's companies like CVS that are putting these bottles right next to actual medicine, which gives them the air of legitimacy. It's places like the NHS who subsidize some homeopathic treatments. It's all of these things that tell people, communicate to people that this is another reasonable way to get treatment, when in fact it's not even snake oil.
It's worse than that. I mean, I'm going back to your taking 50 pills, which I just find ridiculous, but had those actually been any effective at all, and they're super potent, right? So like one pill is extremely potent and you took 50 of them, we're talking like you should be Snow White right now. Like you need to wait for your prince to come around and kiss you.
I should be calling poison control right now.
You should be dead.
Like I have some Unisom. If I take the 50 pills of that, I should probably see a doctor. You know,
any other pill bottle in the CVS that doesn't have homeopathy on it, and you take 50 of them, you definitely need to be getting your guts pumped.
Right. But and again, back to the harm that this can do. So if somebody takes these pills with the expectation they're going to get better, and what they're trying to treat is something serious like cancer or COVID-19, because another thing that they try to tout is homeopathic vaccines, which I don't even know what that means. Well, do they take the vaccine and dilute it down, or do they try to cut up a virus into 100 pieces? I'm not sure. Or I guess like tricks right? Yeah, so that what they would do is they would get something that makes your chest all congested and maybe gives you pneumonia, and then give you a little bit of that. I don't know. I guess.
I don't know. I guess what I'm more concerned about is not necessarily the idiots who subscribe to this, but the idiots' children and the idiots' family members. That's where it really starts to get scary.
It's one thing if you want to go kill yourself by foregoing actual medicine in order to get some crushed up willow bark that's been diluted 1,000 times. That's fine. Whatever. But someone's kid who the only fault they had was being born to morons is going to be seriously hurt or maybe even die. And that's not okay.
No. Yeah. And it's important to bring this stuff up. So it may be funny to be like, hey, Jordan took 50 pills and he's fine. But if you have a friend or family member who actually believes in homeopathy, you should call them out for it. Ask them to give you some evidence as to why it's effective, and not just anecdotal evidence, as we talked about in our fallacy, like, hey, I've been taking this forever and it seems to be working, like, or my uncle used it forever and he's just fine. Like, well, good for you. Like,
at the end of the day, if you just want to take some pills because you think they make you drowsy, you're giving money to charlatans who are fleecing you out of your hard-earned money, but a fool and their money is soon parted, whatever. But if you're really sick, if there's something actually wrong, or if your kid's really sick, please go to a real doctor.
Yeah. And if you know somebody who's doing this for their children, like, it may be worth calling like CPS, or maybe worth calling like, raising a question.
If the neighborhood kid has leukemia and his parents are giving him sugar pills to treat it, then yes, somebody should be called to fix that. This is just yet another example of how a lack of skepticism can be deadly if in the wrong circumstances.
It really is. I was thinking about this earlier, and this is not related to homeopathy exactly, but just more about how our lack of skepticism is leading towards all kinds of just negative effects in our culture, right? Like, people don't question anything. And,
well, they'll question legitimate authorities all day, every day.
Oh yeah, that's for sure. That is for sure. But when it comes to things that actually matter, you're right. Like, I'm really concerned about our education system and why, for people like you and I, where we read this and we're like, or learn about this, and it just seems like a joke. But there's other people who they hear this and they go, "Oh, well, that makes sense." Like,
it's the public school system has failed somewhere, somehow, because it's a running joke, but whenever COVID started, suddenly every single person you met was an expert in the immune system.
Yeah, they're all epidemiologists or they're virologists or something like.
Well, why don't you go do your own research, Mr. Doctor with 20 years experience in the field?
Yeah. Well, that might be another podcast in and of itself. So
yeah. Anyway, before we go off too many tangents and before I pass out from taking this highly effective and very potent sleeping aid, that's our show. We hope you enjoyed it. The TLDL, I guess, since if you're going to watch this on YouTube, it's just like a moving picture without anything really to see.
Too long didn't listen. If you just skip to the end for some reason. Homeopathy is nonsense, and we have the evidence and the stomach contents to prove it. Boom.
So we hope you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, like, comment, subscribe, all that jazz. It really helps people find this. If you didn't like it, let us know what we can improve. If there's something you want us to tackle next, some kind of topic you think is interesting, hit us up on Facebook, facebook.com/reason2doubt, or you can comment on YouTube, or you can hit us on Twitter, press X_to doubt, all those things. You'll see them on YouTube and all links. And I guarantee you, if you suggest something, we'll talk about it.
Because yet nobody has suggested anything. And
not nobody. A couple
people.
Couple people.
The people who have suggested it, we've covered for the most part.
Yeah. So definitely do that. It would really help out this channel. And until next time, remember, you always have reason to doubt.
Peace out.